Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy, and you can find this on YouTube, and Facebook, and our blog. And also check out our great sponsors, Your Dolce Vita, Italy Rooting, and Abiativo Casa. And today I think we're going to have a really, really fun interview with Rock LaManna, the founder, president, and CEO of LaManna Consulting, and also the author of a great book. I really, really enjoyed it. They named you right. So welcome, Rock. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for the invite, Bob. Truly appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. It's really my pleasure. So I want to talk about the book, but before we do that, let's talk a little bit about your family roots, where they're from in Italy, and where they settled in America, where you grew up.
All right, let's start with I'm one of 11 children. I'm number 5. And my parents met as late teenagers in Chicago, and I was born, I think it's number 2 through 11 were born in St. Paul, Minnesota. So I was raised in St. Paul, and also my 10 brothers and sisters. There's 8 boys and 3 girls. At this point, we're all alive, including my father at 98 years old. And life is good. I can't complain. I had a great childhood.
That's fantastic. Yes, I could only imagine 11 brothers and sisters. What was that like?
What was it like? Well, the family, my mother was first generation Polish, 100% Polish. My father, 100% Italian, first generation. And at that point in Chicago, that was a mixed marriage. That was not approved, you know. My mother was the youngest of 5. My father was number 2 of 5. And so we were raised basically on faith. The faith and the loyalty and the dedication to my mother and my father, because they were poor. Both my parents were poor. And they were raised soon after the Depression. They were born in 26, my father and my mother in 1927. And we were raised with a work ethic. It was about faith. It was about family. And Catholic schools all the way through. And, you know, of the 8 boys, you know, it was kind of crazy, but everybody had their own interests, sports, gardening, whatever, okay, education, and so on. So when you got that mix, and then you got 3 sisters that really run the show, that was the point, because my mother was a homemaker, okay, but she was very strong. And having the body of a Polish person and having 11 children, she felt guilty to tell the local priest that she couldn't have any more children. That's how crazy it was, okay? Because they would have had number 12. 12 was not born. So life was good. I mean, we had neighborhoods in South St. Paul, Minnesota, St. Paul, Minnesota. It was called Little Italy. At one time, we moved from Little Italy in 1958, 59, moved to South St. Paul. And then that's when all the kids, the rest of the children were born. And that would be 4 or 5 were born. So we just kept on seeing kids coming. It was normal for us, you know? It was crazy. And my father was a hard worker. He had 3 jobs. He was a printer, and we could go on and on. But we didn't see my father that often because he was always working, you know? And discipline was a big deal. Discipline was a big deal. But when I look back and understand my parents, it was always about the family and the faith and God, of course. And another big one was food. Food was a big deal, because that's where, when you talk about breaking bread, that's what it was. And to be honest, we went through shifts in food, because you can't just feed 11 kids with, you know, a 1 seating. So I'll give you just short understanding of how our dinners went during the weekday, not on Sundays, weekday. Weekday was the first shift, would be the intellectuals. The second shift was their athletes. And the third shift was my father. And nobody wanted to sit with my father. Because we knew we had tasks and you better do the tasks. And my mother would pick at the stove all the way through until my father came. And when my father came, which was 6, 7 o'clock at night, and then, you know, that was after the first shift, then there's a second and a third shift at the business. So we won't get into that right now. And my mother would sit down and have her pastry and coffee because by then she'd already eaten, you know?
That's so funny. So
So
now,
that's our life.
did she cook Italian, Polish, both?
Yeah, that's a great question because even though my mother was 100% Polish, spoke Polish, wrote Polish, read Polish, and so on. Her parents were in Chicago. We were in Minnesota. Okay, so there was that separation. So my mother was taught by my father's side because they were all, the LaMannas were in St. Paul by then. All of them. They all followed my great uncle Tony. Okay. And that's how we ended up in St. Paul because he was an entrepreneur. He had the local barber shop. He had the local billiards. He had the local saloon. He cashed the checks, whatever those are called, cash exchange, because he was the railroad, Chicago, Milwaukee. He was the superintendent of the railroads that were being set along Little Italy. So we saw silos going up. We saw railroads. We saw hardworking guys. And my mother would make Italian roast beef sandwiches. And I would run down that 4 or 5 years old, selling them for $1. These homemade sandwiches for the workers. It was awesome. So my mother was an entrepreneur herself. Okay. So life was good. So all our traditions were Italian. All of them. So, but we still respected the family. Okay. The Dubiels, my mother's side, his maiden name is Dubiel. And as you could imagine, being half Polish, there were a lot of Polish jokes back in the day. Okay. But soon as Pope Paul John II came in, no more Polish jokes. And my mother was so proud of that, you know. Finally a Polish. Okay.
I can only imagine. I could bet. And that's so funny about how you used to eat in shifts. You know, my mom's family, there were 9 in her family, and they were really, really very poor. You know, they would get an orange at Christmas. That's how poor they were. But they had a little game that they would play where if you left your fork, I don't know if it was turned up or turned down, but if you left your fork in a certain way, the other kids could steal your meat out of your dish. That's how poor they were.
Wow. Wow.
And so now Sunday, I guess Sunday was the big Italian meal with everybody together. Yeah.
Yes, it was. And then grandparents could come over, my father's parents, and then his side, they were all there. And then my mother had a sister in Minneapolis. She would come over with her husband, and then we'd have a mix. But understand, St. Paul and Minneapolis are completely different demographics. Okay, Minneapolis is more upbeat, financial districts and so on. St. Paul, blue collar, hardworking people. You know what I mean? And so for us to travel to Minneapolis was a big deal. Like, oh my God, we're going to Duluth. You know what I mean? It was a huge distance. And so Sundays were basically, my mother would iron our clothes, of course. We were always clean. That was my mother's whole thing, was the pride of the cleanliness of the kids. And it was all hand-me-down stuff. My mother was the original bag lader for the Goodwill, seriously. Salvation Army, Little Sisters of the Poor, everything was a hand-me-down, okay? Because, you know, by the time I was number 5, and I always wanted the best. My mother always said, oh, you Rock, you always wanted the best. But I had to work for the best. So I always knew I was always working. I mean, we were working at 9 years old. You know, my dad had a plant. We'd go there to work. We paper boys, the convenience stores. We would do anything, you know what I mean, to make a buck. So, and we were just like my father, because that's what my father did when he was a kid. Okay. So Sundays were cleanliness, all pile into the car, and we were fighting over who's going to get the seat in the window and all that, typical one station wagon. After a while, my brothers were driving, they'd have a car, we'd all meet, and I'd go to mass. And after mass, go home, big dinner, always some type of pasta, lasagna, special events, huge. And people just be bringing in. After a while, you were dating girls, they would be coming in, and they were overwhelmed by the people, because our house wasn't that big. It was just kept people in and out, in and out. And then after that, during football, you'd watch football, take a nap, play cards, a lot of cards downstairs. Okay. And we gambled at a very young age. Okay. Because that was really one of their expertise, was playing cards. My grandfather and my father in Chicago. Okay. So gambling was a big deal. So that was a Sunday. And then the women sweep the floor, do the dishes, no dishwasher. And we would just talk and play around, fight sometimes, but the boys always had to do the pots, and the pots are always huge, right? Downstairs. And me and my brother would actually fight over who's going to clean them. Okay. I'm talking about fist cuff, it was crazy, You're doing it. No, you're doing it, and after a while I realized, hey, these guys are bigger than me. You know what I mean? So that was a typical Sunday, and then sleep, and then we'd have our events, and then I played sports. So usually on the Sunday there was some type of a game or something like that, and family wouldn't attend. They wouldn't come. I think my father, I played high school, a youth school, college. I think my dad's been to 2 games in my whole life. You know what I mean? Because he was busy working, My mother couldn't come. She didn't drive. My mother never drove, never had a driver's license.
Something. So now there's one story in the beginning of the book that I had never heard this before, that I found fascinating. And I guess it was your grandfather when he came. He had a new suit, and you said, wrap it up and tie it with string, and they would send the suit back for somebody else. Yes. I had never heard that before. That's fantastic.
Yep. That was basically told to me more than once. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, is what motivated me was, we got to put these stories, they got to carry on, And my dad was still alive. My mother had passed away. And that's what really motivated me in 1994 to say, you know what? I got to do this. There's so many stories. So the story of the wrapping of the suit and so on, they would just keep passing it on. The LaMannas would keep passing it on. Then the cousins. And if you're larger than 5'5", you're not going to fit in those suits. So everybody was, way less than 6 foot, I mean, 5'9" was, that was big back in those days.
No, I know. I'm in my father's family. I'm not the tallest. I'm not the tallest boy, because my aunt's husband was tall. He was a big man. He was probably about 6 foot. He was from Capri. But yeah, my father's family is small. My aunts were like, 4'11", 5 foot, something like that,
Yeah.
And yeah, like I said, I had never heard that, sending things back. And so when I first saw your name, Rock, I thought for sure Rocco, but your name is Rock, right? So
Yes,
why don't you give us a little insight into that?
Well, my father, my grandfather, Vincenzo, but when he came to Ellis Island, he didn't understand. He couldn't read, he couldn't write. They announced it to the intake, and they just put him down as Jimmy. So that's what he went by, James. And he had a brother, an older brother named Rocco. And in our family, the first 5 are named after all Italian relatives. So we got James, Constance, my grandparents, my father's parents. Then Anthony was my dad's mentor and favorite uncle, Anthony. And then there's Peter, the firstborn, my dad's brother. And Pietro is a relative in Italy, in the Bari Triggiano area. Okay, that's where we're from. And then Rocco. So my story is they didn't want to name me Rocco. And it was March. I was born March 2nd. It was snowing. And my mother went to the St. Paul church called Assumption, which is still there. It's over 100 years old. I still attend Assumption when I'm in St. Paul. And the priest was Polish. And the priest, was kind of hurrying it up. It's a baptism, March 28th. I know my birth date or my baptism is March 28th. And the story goes that my father wasn't there. And he wasn't attending. Word is he was gambling. Making money for the family. And the godparents were there and so on. And what is the name of the baby? Rock John LaManna. Nah, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Rock Hudson was very popular back in the 50s. Big time. And the priest said, nah, you're not going to. It's not. Well, yeah. My mother started crying. And the priest said, okay, let it go. Rock John LaManna. That's what I need. And I do have a photo of Rocco that my grandmother gave me on a pin in the book. I still have it.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. That's really good. And earlier when you mentioned about the Italians are marrying Italians, and my mom's family, everybody married Italian except for my youngest uncle who married. She was Scottish. But by that time, I guess, he was the ninth, he was the baby, probably nobody cared anymore by that point in time.
Right. It was a big deal. It was a big deal back in those days. And what's ironic is they lost the first 5 babies due to disease. And then, so my uncle Pete, he married Polish. My dad married Polish. My auntie married Mexican, Auntie Marion. Auntie Anime married white. We don't know his background. I think it was Slavic or something like that. And then Uncle Nick, same situation. It was, we didn't realize it. We knew it wasn't Italian.
And, you go into it a little bit in the book. But basically, your father worked his way up from just, nothing really to having a big business. And I was shocked about the whole 3M thing, because 3M is a huge company, and
yes,
you don't realize the tentacles, how the tentacles reach out in these companies.
Yep. Well, my father had a high school education, and in those days it was more of a trade school, technical school. And he wanted to be a printer, because when he was a kid, he would be downtown peddling newspapers. And he told us stories that he ran into Orson Welles, Frank Sinatra, and he would sell the newspapers to these guys for pennies, dime, nickel. And my father always had pennies in his pocket, and he would go home and give the money to my grandmother. That was it. So bottom line is, he always was amazed by printing presses. So when he went to I think it was Washburn, it's in the book, I had to talk to him about the details and the facts, the school. And there was a printing letterpress technical courses. So one of his first jobs after the service, or prior to serving in World War II, boot camp, he was working as like an intern at a printing operation, which was I think he said it was the Tribune or something like that, the Chicago Tribune. So he was impressed with that. So when he came back from the service, married my mother, I got to get out of here. get out of Chicago. I got to find something to better myself. He got a job after 2 years of not having a full-time job, just doing gigs in Little Italy for my uncle, in a way. And he went to unemployment. By then, he had 2 babies, my brother Jim and my sister. Went down on unemployment, and they said, Carlo, my father's name is Carlo, there's 3 opportunities here. Number 1, MTC, the local bus. You remember De Niro in that movie, The Bronx?
Mm-hmm.
That's my dad. Could have been my dad. Number 2 was U.S. Postal Service, a mailman. And both jobs were reasonably paid. Okay. The third one was a letterpress pressman in a local St. Paul company called Vomella Company. The gentleman's name was Jack Vomella, who was a Czech. And my dad got the job, the lowest paid job there was, okay, of the 3. So he never knew what was going to happen. So every year, that social worker would call my father and say, you want to go? There's better opportunities, the pay's better. And what my dad's got kid after kid, 14, 15, 2 years at the most, children after child. And my dad just roughed it out. And what he saw was, hey, here's an opportunity for me. I love what I do. I like the people. I have chemistry with Mr. Vomella. He was an entrepreneur. And he stuck it out. And that's what happened. So my father eventually bought into business through sweat equity. And Mr. Vomella had 2 other partners prior to, or during this time, my father was just an employee. But my father had a check from each one of those guys because in the same building, the processes were all different. So they each owned an equity position of each one, and they just collaborated and merged them together. And then guess what happened? A breakup of the 3. Who got involved? The wives. Who's working more? Who's drinking? Who's not drinking? Who's committed? Who's making something happen? So they broke it up, and Mr. Vomella left. Those 2 other guys, they all started up their own businesses. My dad had to go make a decision because all 3 of them wanted my dad to go with them. And his choice was Mr. Vomella, Jack Vomella. And they became the best team because my dad was the worker. Jack was a sales marketing guy. See what I mean?
Well, yeah, and that's what you need. Yeah, sure.
Right. And he would bring back the orders, and my dad would kick ass. And it was Christmas seals and tags. Today, when you go into Kmart or Staples or whatever, you see these little, and a lot of them don't have flock or glitter. Back then, glitter, flock. My dad would come home drenched with these materials, these fabrics. My mother would go nuts because get in the shower right away. You see what I mean? Before you have dinner. That's how we would see my father, always in a t-shirt. He would roll up his hat in a newspaper. You know what I mean? He had this habit of doing that. He had a cigar in his mouth, but he never smoked it. He chewed it. My dad's about, at that time, 5'11", 175, and in shape because they had 3 floors. The buildings were 3. He wouldn't take the elevator. He'd run up the stairs. And I got in the habit of taking 3 steps, 2 steps at a time. And that just kept you in shape. You know what I mean? And so my dad eventually, Mr. Vomella said, and it's all in the book, as you know, Carlo, this is going to be tough. I'll bring in the building. I'll bring in the hard assets. You do the work in exchange for 20%. But you're going to pay me for the 20% when you get it. So this is the sweat equity. It was, he paid him back to 20%. Then in 1959, 3M knocked on the door. We got an idea. And my dad knew how to execute that idea. And that went on for 40 years. Innovation. 3M was about 6 miles away from our home base of St. Paul. We didn't even have a sign in the front because my dad didn't want anybody to know our trade secrets. 3M would come down. There was no non-disclosures, none of that stuff. They would come down, talk to my father, Carlo, trust them. They supplied all the sales. They supplied all the raw materials. We supplied the brains, okay? And Jack would take these guys out fishing, hunting, entertaining, and my dad's doing the work because he knew how beneficial it was. And so that went on for almost 40 years, and I could go on and on about how my father ended up acquiring the other 80%. And that was a sweet deal too by Mr. Vomella. And Mr. Vomella basically became like a father to my dad. He trusted him. They had chemistry. They had integrity. And that's what 3M taught us. Ethics. Integrity. Those are the things that you can't teach people, you know? So
Well,
that's
yeah,
a story.
and I think the great thing about the book, because this doesn't happen anymore, I don't think, or very rarely happens, is that it was more than a business. It was a family. Everybody was treated as an equal, and your father was smart in a sense that, and that's what I worked in the banking business for 40 something years, and I always try to, you can't treat everybody the same, but you have to treat them fair, and I think we're losing that in these big corporations. But I think it was great that, the holidays, there was the turkey, there was the ham, there was the chocolates, that kind of stuff. And I don't think in today's environment, people realize that's the key to success, is keeping your employees happy,
Well, what it taught me, because I was surrounded by my father. I reported to my father at 21 years old. Okay. I went, and don't forget, my 4 brothers and sisters all went through the business before I came through. But he saw something in me. And what he saw in me was, I wanted it. I wanted to be a businessman. Because I couldn't be an athlete. I didn't have the 5-star abilities and the skills. But one thing I had was drive. I had ambition. I knew what I wanted, And my father taught me about, like you were saying, treating people right. His words were always, the people come first. Always. Always. We had a pension. We had a pension back in the 70s. And we were making a ton of money. Okay. And 3M knew it because eventually they ended up doing what we were doing. You saw that in the book, or you read that in the book. But the bottom line was, I think what I really carried on to the next generation, and I've had 7 businesses since 1975. I've started up 7 different businesses. I bought, sold, grew, spun off, all that. All based on my father's knowledge of integrity, doing the right thing. That's the bottom line. Just do the right thing. Don't lie, don't cheat. And I see it all the time. I see it all the time. And that's when I withdraw from deals because, I see trouble. I see trouble. And I got the Chicago instincts. You know what I mean? And a lot of it has to do with your culture, your heritage. I mean, seriously, you got to look back in the past of how people are brought up. And a lot of my clients, I'll go back to their childhood and say, listen, did you ever play sports? Nah, I didn't play sport. See, that told me they weren't team players. You see what I mean? I didn't have the skill set. And my father used to tease my buddies that are all my dad's age and say, Rock really wasn't that good of a player, but he was a hell of a coach. You know why? I was a team player.
Well, yeah, and I think it goes even deeper than that. I think it goes back, and I interviewed somebody who kind of focuses on this. It's even, I think, ingrained in our DNA, some of this, just like our eye color and our hair color and, getting bald and all of that kind of stuff. I think there's something, there's a gene out there someplace that you got from your father that maybe your brothers and sisters didn't get.
Let's not get into that. I won a long time ago. If there's winners and losers, I would say I'm a winner. So you look
But I
at
think it
this.
is I think there's something inherent in that,
Yeah,
it's,
yeah. Oh, no doubt about it. Because there's 11 of us. And I would say there's only 2 that are really entrepreneurial. Okay. And they're both boys. Okay.
Hmm.
And I look at myself, I don't look like my father at all. I'm my mother, and I'm proud of that. I was proud to be a Pole. You know what I mean? Because my mom was a hard worker, man. And by the way, my mother was very gregarious. She was the salesperson. My dad is very low key, very few words. And later on, we realized, holy, dad married right, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's not many Bushas, and Busha is what we learned was grandmother, grandma, and in Polish is what we heard, but later on we heard it was closer more than Russian, because back in those days, Poland was way up towards Russia, and it was probably a Russian saying. You know what I mean? There's different ways of going about it, but the bottom line was my parents. I quote my dad every day. I quote my Uncle Frank every day, who's very similar, Italian, out of Chicago, tough. The streets, see, I'm formally educated, but I got a lot of experience, and I got the streets too. You see what I mean? So I
No,
got
I know.
I got great intuition about when to keep going. Plus, as I age, I realize I don't need this. Or you know what? This is a great opportunity for someone else, you know? And I'm going to help the youngsters. And that's why I'm so proud of my kids, because I actually installed a lot of my discipline and views of my father. And there's no hanky panky with my father. It was always business, always business, always business. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot, and I'm proud of my life. That's
Well,
it.
and that's a perfect segue into, towards the end of the book, where you kind of had an epiphany. And I like the way you said it. It was, everybody was telling you, hey, you need to take a vacation, but you was kind of like, all right, we need to get rid of this guy for a while.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I was all about, micromanagement and all this other stuff, because it was all me. This is the second company we call Advanced Converting
Yeah.
Technologies. And it was tough, because when I sold Vomella, you were a banker. I had no friends. And my father said that to me. He goes, Rock, go see who your friends are without the brick and mortar. Remember?
Yeah.
Being a banker, where's your assets? It's all cash. I was turned down so many times with my strategic plan, my pitch. I ended up doing 100% my own self-funding, just like the book. I realized, listen, who's going to bet on me? I got to bet on me. You see? And who came first in my company? I instilled the same culture that I had with my father into the new company. And it got to the point, Bob, that it got so big to the point where I'm like, I'm going to kill myself with a heart attack. You know what I mean? I was a workaholic. I was a workaholic, and it was out of control. I was out of control.
Yeah. And that's when you made the first trip to Italy, right? And you came back and
Yeah.
changed, right?
I realized that's it. I'm going to sell the business. I'm going to sell the business. And it took me 90 days or less to sell the business. I had 3 targets. I went to all 3. And the company that bought my business over lunch, because that's when I can do this with the right people, right? A handshake. And I cut the deal.
And so,
I stuck to it. And it was growing at the same time. So it was like perfect timing.
yeah. But was it the trip to Italy and going back to the hometown and such, or was it the meeting with the Pope? What do you think moved you that way?
Well, there was a combination because going there to Italy, as I mentioned in the book, I did everything first class. We were accustomed to, our family was accustomed to, God comes first. Foundations come first. Charities come first. The people come first. See, that's what I got. And my mother and father, what I really learned from my mother is my parents, when they were rolling up 11 kids, I asked my mother, Mom, why'd you have 11 kids? Because she originally wanted to be a nun. Okay? She wanted to be a nun. There were very lot deep faith on their side, and on the Polish side and the Italian side. And my mother convinced my father that, listen, we don't know how we're going to get through this. So we got to make a covenant with God. And my dad is living that to this day, which means the foundations of Carlo and Virginia LaManna, their assets, which are millions, are going to their charities and their grandkids. The kids forget about it. You know why? We should have known. We should have been motivated. You're fine. You always worry about your kids, right? You always worry about your kids. Like me, I got 3 kids. And I worry about them. Guess what? They're all established. They're all professionals. They're all, that next level of what life is about is get bigger, better, and faster might not be the answer. And that's when I realized that I was underestimating the good in me when I went to Italy. Because I didn't need this. My father says, Rock, you need this like you need a hole in the head, you know? But I just got that drive and competitive to be the best, whatever it was. Because I was, in a way, an underdog. I always looked at myself as the underdog. From high school, from grade school, all the way up. And then when I went to Italy, it was like, you know what? I could die over here or whatever it is. But that break to see the Pope came out of nowhere. That was not planned. That was not planned. And so Mimo, as you know, our personal friend and guide, who brought around Stan Usual, Bush, Papa Bush, he was very involved with being a personal guide to royalty. Well, we got in. How did the LaMannas get in there? See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So once I realized that, you know what, money doesn't matter. I'm going crazy, and I got good people running the business. So my whole thing is about vision. And my vision, I got to have the right team to execute, because you could have the best vision in the world, but if you can't execute, it's over. You see what I mean?
Sure.
So it was a multiple of things. As you know, I saw my grandfather's home. I went to his church. I saw my cousins, you know, and I just saw the way Italy was. And I'm like, wow, this is unbelievable. And I wear Italian clothes. I eat Italian food. You know what I mean? But nothing's like Italy, you know?
No.
And I got the best education by doing the right thing, you know, by picking the right people and having the right, let's just say, influential mentors in my life that realize that, you know what? It's not about wealth. It's not about this. It's not about that. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of when I realized, you know what? I don't need advanced converting anymore. I don't need this. My kids were all out of college at that time. And so I thought, oh, I did my job. What's next? I've done this, I've done that, and so on. And that's when I made that move. And you know what's ironic? That company that just bought me out just sold, that family business just sold to private equity last year. I am so proud of the companies that I sold grew after 30 years, after 40 years. Why? I had the vision and they executed, because that's what that next step is. You know, as a banker, You could be a visionary and so on, but if you don't get the right people to grow it, it's over. You see?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And at the end of my book, you could bank on it. I have what I call the 60-second MBA. I have 10 points. You have rocks diamonds. So, for people in their, late 20s, early 30s, if you were going to give them 3 pieces of advice out of those diamonds, what would you tell them?
Just so you're aware, I had a fantastic writer, ghostwriter that put this together. Okay. I had the right team, and you're going to laugh at this. It wasn't set up this way. The ghostwriter's Italian. His wife's Italian. So she would read and criticize it, right? And everything we did was they can relate. And I would cry after what he wrote, okay? And laugh and so on. So Rocks Diamonds came out of the 10 Commandments. We were raised on the 10 Commandments. My mother would, the guilt, all that stuff was the 10 Commandments. We went to confession. We went to this, we did that, all the sacraments. All our kids are baptized per se, and everything has changed now, as you know. But the 10 Commandments or Rocks Diamonds, I couldn't give you 3 because they're all part of it. Okay. Here's a good one. Always have a backdoor plan. Always realize strategically, there's always a consequence. Whatever decision you make, there's a consequence. A lot of people don't realize that. And it's okay not to make a decision. It's okay to make a decision, good or bad. But guess what? At the end of the day, it's over. You move on. Okay. Here's another one that my father just brought up to me recently. The bottom line, you want to die happy. Now, what the hell does that mean? It means the way my mom died. And I'll give you an understanding of what my mom, how she passed away. No diseases, just body gave out. My mother and father were in independent living. Hear that? Not assisted living, independent living in Minnesota. A 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, so on. The nurses came in and said, Carlo, it's time to say goodbye to Virginia. My sisters were there. Everybody's crying. My dad came in. We have photos of this. My dad kissed my mother goodbye. See you in heaven. And she was happy to go. It was time. And that's another word that my dad uses, especially now. Well, I might as well give you this one here for the top 3 or a few of them. Don't be afraid to say, I got this, even when you don't. Because you could be crazy, man. You don't know what's going on. You don't know if you're going to wake up the next day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you just do the right thing, you're not going to worry about it. My dad's 98. He still questions me every Thursday when I take him out for breakfast. Why does God want me here? I said, Dad, that's your purpose. That's your purpose, to keep the family united, to do what you have to do. You're not done. Well, I want to be with my wife. I said, Dad, that'll come. That'll come, but this is God's plan. But being not sick, no dementia, having your intellect, having your mind, having your physical skill set, and he's still got willpower. I can't believe it. He is still going like this. He treats it like I'm 12. He says, hey, Rock. You know what I mean? But it's okay. We play cribbage every Sunday. And he's always trying to squeeze another point or 2. You know what I mean? Dad, no. 52, 54, and a run is 12. No, that's not the way. That's a 20. No, it's not, Dad. It's a 16. And then I got to go AI. Then I got to go Google. And then he'll do it. He's got an eye for it. He knows how to use an iPhone.
Fantastic. Oh, that's great. That's
No
so super.
walker, no walker, still
Wow.
driving, not with me. No, what do you call it? Cane, don't even know how to say it. He doesn't have a cane. Lives alone here in Florida, 3 months out of the year, goes back to Minnesota, showers himself, does everything himself. And he likes cologne. I said, Dad, don't worry, you look good, you smell good, but it's okay.
Wow, that's fantastic.
This is what I'm
That's so
saying. It's,
great.
how can I not say my life is great? I mean, come on.
Well, like you said, there's a purpose. I'm a firm believer, especially with all this genealogy stuff and everything. Nothing happens by accident. People find their relatives in the weirdest places, in the weirdest ways. They get inspired by different ways, and I don't know what to call it, but there's something else out there. Driving things. I think, especially when it comes to that.
Bob, just so you're aware, I've been to Italy, I believe, 5 times now. Okay. Every time I go, and I'm going to be honest with you, we were brought up, or our family was down south. Yeah, okay, we get it. We get it. But I'll tell you, when I launched the book, I went to Milan up to the Dolomites and so on. Unbelievably beautiful. I mean, it is Italy, all of Italy is like all different, areas, environment, and so on. It's just so beautiful. The people are awesome. And I can't say enough about Italy, but I've hit every part of my bucket list until this year. I'm going April, I'm going to Japan. First time. And what influenced me about Japan was Oppenheimer, the movie. It brought back my mind in the 80s with 3M and the automotive industry. The Japanese would come through our plant, and I was so respectful and so on. And I said, you know what? They're about technology. They're about precision. They talk about innovation, And in my world, which is signage and graphics and printing, it's like, wow, I got to check this out. So what's next? I don't know. God's got the plan,
Yeah, and it becomes clear when it becomes clear, I suppose. So before we go, where can people find the book, and where can they find LaManna Consulting?
Okay, we got a few. Just look under Rock LaManna, ROCK, capital MANNA, or just put Rock LaManna, Google me. You'll see multiple, I basically prioritized and put everything under one brand, which is my name. In the meantime, the company is called LaManna Consulting Group. And what do I do there? I basically work with private equity and entrepreneurs, and I do matchmaking. And a lot of it is therapeutic. It's like I'm a priest, rabbi, and a therapist all wrapped up into one. Okay. As a banker, that's true. The book has its own website. It's called They Named You Right. And you know how I got that name, right?
Yes. But
We
let's make people buy the book to
yeah,
find
that's what I was
that
going to say.
out.
We're not going to give it up. That's what the book was actually named something different at first. And I said, no, this is it, because the more you get into the book, the more you realize it evolves. And that's how the 10 Commandments or Rock's Diamonds came out, you see? And it's really going well. So Rock LaManna, They Named You Right is another website. And LinkedIn, I'm big, rocklamanna.com. I'm on YouTube. And I got a lot of shorts on there, and I got some podcasts and so on, like yours, hopefully here soon. And that's it.
Super. Well, that's great. I really appreciate you taking the time. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, I feel honored. And you know how we got together? Through Dan Nemec, right?
Yes, yeah.
And
He's a good guy.
and not only that, he supplied a lot of the photos and the facts and the dates and all that. So he was huge on this. So it's actually going really well. It's really set up for entrepreneurs and people that are looking to really understand how tough it is to be an entrepreneur and how much you suffer to get, and maybe it's not worth doing it. You see what I mean? So I try to convince people to say, hey, listen, this is what you need to do, and it's a tough thing to do because a lot of people suffer. A lot of my family members suffered because of my drive, but I got to the end zone. So That's it.
And yeah, that's the important thing.